We are currently living through a slow-motion, highly calculated banking crisis. The toxic financial asset threatening the stability of the global economy is no longer the subprime residential mortgage that detonated in 2008. The new toxic asset is the modern commercial office building. The contemporary American metropolis is fundamentally hollow. A $20 trillion commercial real estate market was constructed upon the absolute unquestioned certainty of the 5-day in-person commuter workweek. That behavioral paradigm is permanently dead, but the multi-million-dollar institutional loans attached to the concrete and glass are maturing right now. The global financial system is standing at the base of a towering maturity wall. According to data tracked by the Mortgage Bankers Association, roughly $1.5 to $2 trillion in commercial real estate debt is scheduled to mature between 2024 and 2026. To understand the gravity of this situation, it is critical to understand that commercial real estate is not financed like residential real estate. An institutional investor does not take out a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage to purchase a 50-story skyscraper. They utilize commercial loans that operate on much shorter timelines, typically 3, 5, or 10-year structures. Furthermore, these are frequently interest-only loans, meaning the borrower only pays the interest generated by the principal during the life of the loan. At the end of the term, a massive balloon payment for the entire original principal is due. In a functional market, the borrower never actually pays this balloon payment in cash. They simply refinance the building, securing a new loan to pay off the old one, perpetually rolling the debt forward. This system functions perfectly as long as two variables remain stable. The building must maintain its valuation and interest rates must remain low. Today, both of those variables have violently inverted, creating a mathematical doom loop that is destroying equity and threatening to completely wipe out the regional banking sector. To grasp how a skyscraper goes bankrupt and drags a financial institution down, with it, the underlying mathematics of commercial valuation must be dissected. Unlike single-family homes, which derive their value from comparable sales in the surrounding neighborhood, commercial office buildings are valued strictly as yield-generating financial instruments. A skyscraper is essentially a giant bond made of steel. Its value is determined by a simple mathematical formula: net operating income divided by the capitalization rate, commonly referred to as the cap rate. Net operating income is the revenue generated by tenant leases minus the operating expenses of the building. The cap rate is the rate of return demanded by the market, which is heavily dictated by the Federal Reserve's baseline interest rates. In the decade following the 2008 financial crisis, interest rates were pinned at near zero. This artificially suppressed cap rates, which mathematically drove the valuations of commercial buildings into the stratosphere. Institutional investors borrowed billions of dollars at 3% interest to purchase office towers that generated a 4 or 5% return, pocketing the spread. Then the fundamental architecture of modern work fractured. Following the widespread adoption of remote and hybrid work models, office vacancy rates in major metropolitan centers like San Francisco, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Manhattan breached 20 to 30%, levels of emptiness unseen in modern economic history. Simultaneously, the Federal Reserve embarked on the most aggressive interest rate hiking cycle in 4 decades to combat inflation. This dual shock destroyed the valuation equation from both sides simultaneously. The numerator, net operating income, collapsed because tenants refused to renew their leases, drastically reducing the building's revenue. Simultaneously, the denominator, the cap rate, spiked because the cost of borrowing money skyrocketed. Consider the hypothetical yet mathematically accurate scenario of a premier office tower purchased in 2019 for $100 million. The institutional buyer secured $70 million in debt at a 3% interest rate, putting down $30 million in equity. Today, that building is only 60% occupied. The net operating income has been decimated. Concurrently, refinancing that debt today would require an interest rate of 7 or 8%. When the new revenue is divided by the new cap rate, the market value of the entire building plunges from $100 million down to $40 million. The building's value is now significantly lower than the $70 million loan attached to it. The entire $30 million of the owner's original equity has been vaporized into thin air. The asset is entirely underwater. The owner has absolutely no financial incentive to continue paying the mortgage. and the bank is left holding a $70 million piece of paper backed by a building that could only be sold for $40 million in a fire sale. This toxic math leads directly to the concentration risk that defines the current banking crisis. When discussing systemic financial collapse, the public immediately envisions the massive Tier 1 megabanks. However, institutions of that scale are largely insulated from this specific commercial real estate fallout. Following the catastrophic failures of 2008, federal regulators implemented the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. This legislation subjected the largest, systemically important financial institutions to intense regulatory scrutiny and annual stress tests. To comply, the megabanks aggressively de-risked their balance sheets, pulling back heavily from volatile commercial real estate lending. But the economy still demanded capital to build and transact commercial properties. This massive void in the lending market was eagerly filled by small, mid-sized, and regional banks. In order to compete with the sheer scale and technological dominance of the megabanks, regional banks were forced to specialize. They aggressively pursued commercial real estate loans in their local markets, capitalizing on their localized knowledge and relationship-based lending models. Fast forward to the present day, and small to mid-sized banks hold roughly 70% of all outstanding commercial real estate loans in the United States. For many of these regional institutions, commercial real estate debt constitutes a terrifying percentage of their total loan portfolio, frequently exceeding 300 to 400% of their total risk-based capital. They are hyper-concentrated in a single failing asset class. A default rate of just 10 to 15% on these specific office portfolios is mathematically sufficient to wipe out the Tier 1 capital reserves of hundreds of regional banks, rendering them legally insolvent and triggering immediate FDIC intervention. The obvious question arises, if the underlying math is so completely broken, why haven't hundreds of regional banks failed already? The answer lies in a sophisticated, industry-wide accounting illusion known as extend and pretend, or as it is colloquially referred to in institutional circles, survive until 2025. When a multi-million-dollar balloon payment comes due on a half-empty office building, the bank faces a brutal decision. They can demand payment which the borrower cannot make. This forces the bank to foreclose on the property, take ownership of a massive, depreciating physical asset, and immediately sell it at a catastrophic loss. Under regulatory accounting rules, this forces the bank to mark to market, meaning they must officially record that 50% loss on their quarterly balance sheet. For a heavily exposed regional bank, recognizing that loss would instantly trigger a collapse in their stock price and spark a devastating bank run by uninsured depositors. To avoid triggering this death spiral, the banks engage in regulatory forbearance. Instead of foreclosing, the bank simply extends the terms of the loan for another 12, 24, or 36 months. They waive the maturity date forward, often without requiring any reduction in the principal balance, and pretend the underlying asset is still worth its original 2019 valuation. The entire banking sector is holding its collective breath, engaging in a high-stakes psychological delay tactic, praying that the Federal Reserve drastically slashes interest rates before the extended deadlines expire. This allows the bank to maintain the illusion of solvency on paper, deferring the realization of the loss into an undefined future. It is a state of financial suspended animation, but it is an inherently unsustainable strategy. The illusion is already beginning to shatter because institutional investors operate with a ruthless, detached logic that differs entirely from the emotional behavior of a homeowner. During the subprime crisis of 2008, desperate families exhausted their life savings trying to save their homes from foreclosure before finally mailing the keys back to the bank, a phenomenon known as jingle mail. Today, the entities mailing the keys back are massive private equity firms, sovereign wealth funds, and institutional landlords managing hundreds of billions of dollars. These entities utilize non-recourse debt to finance their acquisitions. Non-recourse debt means that the loan is secured exclusively by the physical property itself. If the borrower defaults, the bank can seize the building, but they absolutely cannot pursue the broader corporate assets of the institutional investor to cover the shortfall. Because the debt is non-recourse, the decision to default is not an emotional failure. It is a clinical, mathematical optimization strategy. When a major private equity firm analyzes an office tower in downtown San Francisco and realizes the equity is wiped out, and the cost of capital exceeds the projected yield. Continuing to service that debt becomes a direct violation of their fiduciary duty to their shareholders. They will not throw good capital after bad. They execute a strategic default. They intentionally stop making the mortgage payments, hand the physical keys to a completely unprepared regional bank, and walk away clean. This is currently happening at the highest levels of the market. Massive, trophy-class towers in major metropolitan centers are being surrendered directly to lenders or sold at staggering 60 to 70% discounts from their pre-pandemic appraisals. Every time a major tower is sold at a 70% discount, it sets a new, lower comparable valuation for every other building on that city block, accelerating the downward spiral of the entire local market. The consequences of this trillion-dollar ghost town extend far beyond the balance sheets of regional banks. The fallout is destined to cripple the foundational infrastructure of the cities themselves. The mathematical collapse of commercial real estate valuations triggers a direct, proportional collapse in municipal tax revenue. Cities like New York, Boston, Chicago, and San Francisco rely heavily on commercial property taxes to fund their operating budgets, frequently deriving 20 to 30% of their total municipal revenue from the downtown commercial core. Property taxes are assessed based on the market value of the building. When the valuation of a massive office complex is legally reassessed, from $200 million down to $60 million due to a distressed sale or prolonged vacancy, the tax bill owed to the city shrinks by the exact same proportion. This creates a terrifying macroeconomic phenomenon known as the urban doom loop. As the commercial tax base evaporates, municipalities are faced with massive unexpected budget deficits. Because local governments generally cannot print currency to monetize their debt like the federal government, they are forced to balance their budgets through brutal austerity measures. They must drastically reduce funding for public transit systems, cut back on municipal sanitation schedules, delay critical infrastructure maintenance, and reduce emergency services personnel. As the physical condition and safety of the downtown core deteriorates due to defunding, the remaining corporate tenants refuse to renew their leases, accelerating the exodus from the city. This secondary wave of vacancies further depresses commercial property values, which in turn causes another severe drop in property tax revenue, necessitating even deeper municipal budget cuts. It is a self-reinforcing cycle of urban decay driven entirely by the initial destruction of commercial real estate equity. The regional banks, holding the bag on trillions of dollars of toxic debt, will be the first dominoes to fall, consumed by the sheer scale of the defaults they are desperately trying to conceal. But the ultimate price of the 2008 echo will be paid by the urban centers themselves. The physical footprint of the modern economy was built for a reality that no longer exists. The skyscrapers are empty, the debt is coming due, the accounting illusions are expiring, and the trillion-dollar bill for the ghost towns is finally being presented to a banking system completely incapable of paying it.